everyone. Thanks so much for coming and staying. We're so lucky to have the following guests come out and talk about this incredible movie. First up, actor Matt Damon. Christopher Nolan. Thank you all for being here, and congratulations. This film is so incredible. I've seen it now at least 8 times. It is, I don't know how you guys feel, it is one of these movies that it defies genre. It's so many things. It's a thriller, it's a tragedy, it's a western, there's a heist, there's a courtroom drama, it's everything. Leaves you with questions. And I just want to take a moment to say that this blockbuster that made so much money this summer, came out of Hollywood, is about science and history. And what an achievement that is. And thank you for bringing people back to the movie. I know that Robert Oppenheimer, we're all of the same generation here, so we all grew up at a time where, you know, we all were sort of vaguely worried about bombs and Russians and all the rest of it. And Oppenheimer, I know, made an appearance in your movie Tenet. And I know that Robert Pattinson gave you a collection of his speeches. And that is sort of the beginning, the chain reaction of Oppenheimer here. But I really want to talk about the adaptation of the 2005 book, American Prometheus, that this is adapted from. An incredible book, if you guys haven't read it. Hefty.
Yeah, it's not short.
No.
700 and something. Yeah, it's a big book, but Kai Bird and Martin Sherwin, who wrote it, they literally spent 25 years on it. Martin Sherwin, in particular, who passed away right as I finished the script. But he spent 20 years interviewing everyone he could find who'd ever known Oppenheimer and putting this book together. They published it after 25 years of work, and it won the Pulitzer Prize. It's a phenomenal book if anyone is looking to read more on the subject.
It's very long. You also did a lot of your own research, which we will get into later. But I'm curious, when you read a book and you're trying to decide, this is really for both of you, what is your next project going to be? When you're reading a book like this, and it's his whole life story, at what point do you think, okay, I have a handle on the story I want to tell about this man? Because it's not a traditional biopic, as I said earlier. And at what point, how many times do you have to read the book before you're like, okay, I think I know the story I want to tell?
I think in the case of this book, really the first read started to convince me in a major way that this was the way to approach telling Oppenheimer's story on film. I then read it a second time to just let it all soak in and took a lot of notes about, okay, what had stuck in my head anecdotally, you know, what are the key markers. But Kai and Marty, they did such a beautiful job of kind of laying out not just a chronological life, but also some thematic connections. The thing that compelled me the most was learning about the personal connection. And so I think it was really, even on the first read, when it got to the moment where you realize in the book, and we put it very much the same way in the film, when you realize that Los Alamos, this place that becomes so important to history, was just a place he and his brother liked to go camping. And so that you suddenly see this connection between the personal and, you know, the wider world. So I think at that point I was in. But I don't know at what point I sort of told you what I thought it could be. I don't know when you were convinced, to put it that way.
It took me a while, I'm going to say. I mean, when I read the book and Chris was like, I think it's going to be, you know, I want to make an epic movie. We're going to put it out in the summer. It's going to be, I was like, okay. And I read the book and I found it absolutely compelling, but just, I could not understand how Chris was going to make something that was going to move fast and sort of provide all the things that a cinema audience wants, you know. And that really, really, really was tricky for me, because he'd said it's going to have to be 3 hours, which again, I was like, I'm not really sure. I think the moment where there was definitely a moment where he sort of said to me, okay, I figured out the end. Like, I have the ending, and if ever you've seen any of Chris's other movies, he is great at endings. I think that's one of the things that I love about his movies is you always kind of get to the end and you're like, yes, you know, he always lands the plane. And it was when he told me that he'd got the ending that I was like, okay.
I guess we're making it.
And then finally when I read it, you know, and I read the way he had made it exciting, you know, there's the suspense of the sort of the courtroom stuff, there's the heist, this putting together of the team, the way he'd written all the characters, you know, which then of course, you know, Matt and everybody came and sort of brought so much to. But certainly when I read the script, I was like, okay, yeah, you know, it worked. It was such an incredible adaptation of this incredible book.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to ask you, I mean, you've produced every single one of Chris's movies, and I know that you're probably one of his first readers, if not the first. When you're reading his scripts for the first time, are you able to not have your producer hat on, or are you like, oh my God, we're going to have to make a bomb?
It's really, really hard not to be thinking about. I mean, I try when I read, like, he'll often tell me what he's doing as he's writing. I tend not to read anything until he's done a whole draft. And so I try to read it as an audience member, but it's inevitable that I'm sort of sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, how are we going to do this? And
I used to watch her read the draft, and then it was Memento was the last time I did that, because she sat there going, I couldn't take it, so after that...
I don't have a very good poker face.
No poker face. So after that, yeah, I just leave the script with her and say, okay, tell me whether we can do this.
I don't know how many of you guys know this, but you did something very unusual with the script and wrote the Oppenheimer point of view in the first person. At what point in your writing process did you decide to do that?
I was working on the first act, and I knew I wanted to tell the story very subjectively, and I kept sort of reaching for a way to express that on the page. And I don't know, it just sort of popped into my head to just try it. So I did, and I was stuck in a house quarantining with my brother at the time, who I've worked with a lot of projects, and I just sort of threw it at him and said, without saying why I was showing it to him, like, you know, I said, okay, read this, see what you think. And he was like, no, this works, because you finally found a way to make people read the stage directions. And my scripts have always really depended on the stage directions, but like so many of us here, we read a lot of scripts, you wind up just reading the dialogue. But there's something about the first person that sucks you into those stage directions, so you start really paying attention to it. And I got excited at that point about, okay, this is going to be a great reminder to me, to everybody on set, to Killian, you know, taking on the character, that we're really going to be in his head the whole time.
Now, Damon, you know something about screenwriting and have read a lot of scripts. What is it like for you when you see a script like that come in? And that's very unusual, right? The first person.
I've never seen that before. And also it comes, so Chris, you know, Chris very famously doesn't send his scripts. You have to either go to the office and sit and read it, or in the case with this one, he showed up in New York on a Friday night with the script, and I said, well, you know, we're having dinner, and I can't read it till tomorrow morning. And so he left the script with me overnight, which was very rare. But he said before he left, we talked for an hour or so, and then he said, how fast do you read? And I said, I read at the exact pace that the movie's going to go, like Emma's saying. Like, you want to read it as an audience and you want it to wash over you. He said, what time will you start reading? And I thought about it. I said, Chris, I'm going to start reading at exactly 9 a.m. He goes, I'll be here at noon. At 12 o'clock, he showed up. He took the script back, and then we sat and we talked for hours and hours and hours, because it was the experience of reading the script. It was really something, because I had never seen a script written in the first person. I was completely, what it does more than get you to engage with the stage direction, which I actually do read the stage direction, because I also write, and I appreciate that somebody else wrote the stage direction, and so I read it, but I understand that some people don't. But what it did was, it not only made you read it, it was a way to, it was like a signal effect to the crew of, you know, every key in every department, you understand the movie you're making. And it had this propulsion to it, the same way that the film does. And so people go, oh, it's a movie about physics and scientists and talking. You go like, no, this is going to be an experience And you really felt that when you read the script. So.
Sure. Do you need to read a Christopher Nolan script to know that you're going to do a Christopher Nolan movie?
Oh. No.
Because I heard you had, I guess, like a movie hall pass with your wife, that if Chris Nolan happened to come calling, that you were allowed to go and make a movie.
That's true. It's a little more embarrassing than that, because we'd actually had a whole therapy session about the fact that I was going to not work, and at the very end of the session, I had because Chris is really mercurial about what he's going to do, and he's on he and Emma have this kind of timetable, because it takes so long for them to come up with an idea, to write, to work, to set it all up, and it's every 3 or so years that you get another Chris Nolan movie. So I realized at the end of this therapy session that I was like, wait, there's one thing I want to, I have a caveat. What's the caveat? I said, well, if Christopher Nolan were to call, and we all placed the chances of like 1 in 1,000, but then of course it happened. And she smiled the whole way. She was excited. Like, we're very big fans of his movies, so just as a family, so it was cool.
I did like that, much like Oppenheimer trying to assemble the very, very best of the best to put together the Manhattan Project. You have assembled this incredible cast, of which you are a great part of, but and also like your DP, your special effects, the makeup, the hair, every single thing. These are all people that you tend to work with time and time again. Do you feel like you now have your repertory of people that you now can call upon?
I mean, it's fantastic working with people more than once. You get a shared language, you get a lot of trust, but also you fall out of step with people. People move on. You need to get new people, and so I think with all the last few films, we've tried to really strike a balance, certainly in the crew sense, with old faces, familiar faces that we have that language with, and then bring on new. So, I mean, for example, in this film, there were some new people we worked with, like Ellen Moroznik doing costumes, who's just extraordinary. Ruth de Jong doing production design, who, she came up under Jack Fisk, and she's, I met her through Hoyte, because she'd just done Jordan Peele's Note with Hoyte van Hoytema. Yeah, so we try to strike a balance, but it's good to have enough people around that you worked with before, because they also reassure the new people sometimes that things will be okay. It's like there's a plan. It may not seem like there's a plan, or whatever particular quirky thing that we happen to be going down, that they'll be okay. So no, it was an amazing team on this, and an incredible ensemble cast. I have to give a shout out to our casting director, John Capsadera, who we've worked with since Memento. He's, I suppose, the longest serving member of our crew, really. And the depth of cast, obviously with Cillian Murphy at the center of it. Cillian I worked with for 20 years, always in supporting roles, never really a chance to play a lead. So it was great to be able to just call him up and say, this is it, you're going to carry this one. But it's also a huge ensemble around him, and so it's a lot of incredible faces, some very new, some very well known. I call him a lot of favors, like coming to see Matt Damon in Brooklyn saying we need General Groves, and he's got it, in real life he was a very controversial figure, not that well loved by everybody, and I felt that Matt is a guy who can do that, who can project the truth of that. He was a hard ass, he was a very manipulative person, also very smart, but I think that Matt finds a way to not alienate the audience from that, to kind of draw them into that, and yeah, I mean, just an incredible cast. It was such a joy.
It's an incredible character that you play, and I think I read a quote of yours that he's a little bit like a kindergarten teacher, and I like that analogy because it's sort of like all these eccentric scientist cats that you're trying to herd into, some sort of semblance, and your character gets to be the one person who gets to say things like, boot on your balls and things like that. So that's fun, right? I mean,
yeah, no, I think he referred to himself as a kindergarten teacher, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and Chris really, look, every movie's very different, and I kind of liken this. I said to my wife after I finished, I was like, it's like knowing you're on a great record and going like, I got to play on that one. You know what I mean? I'm there, like I'm somewhere in that beautiful sound. and when I said to Chris early on, I was just like, what are you looking for? And he said accessibility. Here's the difference between like a way a great director talk. They're very succinct with you when they talk. He gave a whole answer basically saying accessibility, but that's what he said to me in one he was like, accessibility. I was like, got it, okay, good, we're good. And those were kind of my marching orders, and it made total sense when I looked at the whole thing, because he thought about every single aspect of it so carefully. He even asked me when I first read it, he goes, obviously it's a longer movie. Do you have any cuts you can think of looking at it? And I said, no, I really don't. I think it's incredible. And I said, maybe when we shoot it, you'll put it up and you'll see some places that you can maybe pull some things. And he goes, I don't do that. I was like, excuse me? He goes, no, I don't do that. If I shoot it, it's going to be in the movie. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to shut up now. I'm just going to come to work. Just tell me where to stand.
I give us a cards on the table there. There's one little speech I got to cut, which was actually General Groves after we shot it. And the reason is, there's a very important moment towards the end of the film where, Groves just says, but hang on, I wouldn't have cleared any of those guys. And he really opens the film for an audience. It as Emma says, lands the plane on the Groves story. And that was a line that Matt wrote. He is, as you may know, an Oscar-winning screenwriter. Well, what was wonderful about it is we were working from the transcripts, the real transcripts. I didn't want to invent dialogue. And so Matt knew that coming to me with that would sort of potentially break those rules. And so he came to me with several page references from the transcripts of later things that Groves had said that fully justified changing that line, putting that line in there. And in the end, it saved me a whole other speech, which was a great speech and very well delivered, but a little redundant to Vanderbilt Bush, because it said similar things in testimony. So I was able to pull that out and just hang it on that line. And it was...
So the amendment is, I don't cut anything in my script, only your speeches.
Nothing gets cut from that. Yeah, it's your own fault, because without the added line, the rest couldn't have come out. It would have had to be there, and it greatly improved the way that lands, and I'm very grateful for it. But I was also very grateful for the care and attention that Matt and the rest of the cast brought. So you go into scenes like the GAC meeting in the hotel room with Downey and Killian and everybody, and everybody there knew more about the person they were playing than I did. And when you write fiction, you're there, and they're saying, well, hang on, why would I do this? What did I have for breakfast? Or you have to be constantly inventing that stuff. These guys were able to come every day knowing more about it than I did, and therefore able to improvise, to go off script, to make suggestions. And the great thing for those kind of scenes, the scenes, where we have Groves and all the scientists and everything, is you could say that we'll just spin it out, make something up, throw in some lines, flesh it out from what's specifically written in the script, so that the energy of the scene is there for the actors, and they're having fun with it, they're throwing it around in an educated way, and that was because of the homework they'd done, so I was very, very grateful to them for that.
Yeah, the one good thing about this movie is that every single character portrayed basically wrote a book. So every actor got their part, and they went and bought the autobiography of whichever scientist they were playing, and then they came armed with all this.
They came on with it, and they would say to me, well, you know how in the book, and I'd say, no, I haven't read it, so I'll take it on.
I'm working from a different book.
I'm working from a different book. Yeah, but it was, it was a really unique experience in that regard, and it's also, it feeds into the energy of how the whole thing was made. It's very different from the way that we've been able to work in the past. And what that means is when I see the film, because I've watched the film many, many times, obviously, and it's constantly held my attention in a way that my other films haven't, because I'm seeing things that other people brought to it. I'm seeing things reflecting on real life, and obviously something somebody says as real life. Every time you see Edward Teller in the scene talking in the security hearings about whether or not he would clear Oppenheimer, you can read the way Benny did that line, you can read that 10 different ways. And that's because it's coming from reality and from his interpretation of reality. So it's a very unique experience for me in this film.
Speaking of doing your homework, I know that despite the 25 years Kuiper and Martin Sherman worked on their book and the Pulitzer and everything like that, you were able to go and comb through thousands of pages of transcripts from the hearings in the 50s for both Oppenheimer and Strauss, and you were able to make that connection, that key sort of, you know, the echo between the two men and their experiences. How exciting is it for you when you're in that sort of discovery phase to be like, oh, I see what I can do with this here?
It's really exciting, particularly, I mean, for me, one of the great thrills of the screenwriting process in this case was showing Kuiper the script and having him say, who's David Hill? You know, how did you find that? How did you, and he was thrilled. I mean, he was thrilled that I'd gone, you know, back to primary sources. But the truth is, when you have such a huge book as American Prometheus, you've got everything you need, but there are ideas, I suggest, so that the parallelism with Strauss is in the book, it's suggested in the book, but it makes you want to know more. You're like, well, hang on, what were the Senate confirmation hearings really like? What was said? And so you go back and you read the transcript, and then you find a couple of different scientists, some who couldn't be included in that. Inglis is one, but David Hill, who Rami Malek plays, you know, he said those things. He stood up in front of his country and took on a very, very powerful establishment figure and represented, therefore, the way in which the entire scientific community, other than Edward Teller, really, but the entire scientific community, whatever they thought of Oppenheimer personally, and whatever they thought professionally in terms of his philosophy of science and the rest, they saw what the government had done to him, and they all pulled together and supported him in a very remarkable way that you don't often see.
One of the more astonishing things I learned about this movie was how many days you guys spent shooting. Emma, how many shooting days did you have on this movie?
57, we actually shot it in.
Okay, now Damon, I'd like you to comment on the fact that this movie was shot in 57 days.
It's fucking ridiculous.
That was not the original plan, I will say. We were originally sort of hoping that maybe we could do, I think we were thinking 65. Like,
75,
well, I was thinking 65. And that was after some serious budget conversations, we were thinking 65, but then it kind of, we just realized that we weren't going to be able to do what we needed to do, and Chris is not only a very talented writer and an incredible director, but he's also a great producer, because he sort of went back and was like, okay, well, there's this one thing I can do, and he rethought everything about the way he was going to shoot the film so that we could do it in 57 days.
That's very kind of you to put it that way. It was not great producing, it was a pure bluff. I was like, okay, fine, I'll shoot it in 57 days, whatever. And then everyone around me went, great. I went to Hoyter, I went to Nilo, first AD, and said, what do you think about shooting it this fast? And I remember Nilo just sort of said, well, how do you want to spend the next 3 months of your life under crazy stress or whatever? I'm like, yeah, I guess that's what it is. But Hoyter, I think, really, I mean, it was his cooperation that made it work, because we committed to a single camera approach. And we didn't have a Steadicam, we didn't have techno cranes. We committed to an approach that basically said, every morning you throw the actors in together, you see how the dynamic develops for about half an hour, 45 minutes or so, and then we just start shooting it and seeing how it falls in, and not believing that we're going to be able to cover 12 different eye lines. And so, you know, it really required Hoyter to just embrace that spirit, and you know, he's just an incredible director of photography and an incredible creative ally, and I think that helped enormously.
It also required you to cut in camera.
Yeah, it did. But that's going back to the sort of independent days. So I'm okay doing that. You know, I enjoy that as a process. I think honestly, a lot of it comes back to the ensemble and the actors as well.
Exactly.
Because when you have that energy in the room and people just able to kind of throw that ball of conversation back and forth or whatever, you start to get a rhythm, and Hoyter and I start to see the rhythm of how that's going to work. And letting that play out, and on a tight schedule, it can be scary to rehearse for the first 45 minutes or an hour in the morning before you actually decide where to put the camera. But it worked because that was what was driving the whole thing. In the case of this movie, it's not an action film, but we wanted to treat the dialogue scenes almost as if they were action scenes. So you want to see physically how they wind up, you know, blocking out, and that just requires a a lot of rehearsal, really, a lot of just having fun with it and playing around with it.
And I would say that everybody on the movie had a part in making that 57 days achievable. It was, you know, obviously Hoyte and Chris had coming up with that plan, but it was also, you know, our actors were on set all the time, right? Nobody was leaving to go back to base camp. Everybody was just there and ready, and, you know, there was not a wasted minute, any single moment of any day. And that was really down to every single person who worked on the
But
cast.
it's also
and crew.
down to your philosophy about how you guys work, which is my favorite way to work, where all the momentum is in front of the camera. And you know, Steven Soderbergh, who I've done 10 movies with, you know, he's exactly the same. You know, there is a base camp, there is a place for you to change and go to the bathroom and eat your breakfast in the morning, and then you come to set and you never leave. And that's not a, that's why you're there, and it's electric. And when you're on, when you're not on one of those movies that's just kind of futzing about, you know, it's just, everything is motion, and you're just trying to jump in where you're needed, and it's just the most fun you can have making a movie. It really is.
I'm curious, I mean, so much of what the generation of scientists before Oppenheimer were so put off by the new science, the new physics, and because they couldn't see it. So it was hard to wrap their head around the idea of what was happening with quantum mechanics. And I'm curious, for you guys as filmmakers, how do you go about thinking about making that a visual reality for people to understand when it was already so hard for people to understand in the time?
I mean, really, the main thing in it is, once Emma had read the script and we knew we were doing it, the first person I showed the script to was Andrew Jackson, our visual effects supervisor, way ahead of time. You know, I just said, we're going to need a way, it's not going to be a lot of shots in the film, but they're going to be absolutely crucial ones, leading right up to the Trinity test. But this idea of showing the energy inside, you know, dull matter, and how that could be released ultimately with the Trinity test. And so I also said to him, I want to use analog methods. I don't want to use computer graphics, or at least not in an animated sense. And so he went away very privately, just playing around with microscopic things and different approaches. Because ultimately, yeah, you're trying to portray something that quantum physics sort of took off the table, which is the visual representation of the atom. We were talking about the IAS, about Robert Dygroff, who's the director of the IAS in Princeton. I went to meet with them to see if we could film that, but I also started to pick his brains about quantum physics and how we'd represent it. And he confronted me with that reality. He said, yeah, you can't visualize the atom anymore. And that was very frightening for the physicists at the time. Very frightening for a filmmaker at the time, trying to now portray these things. And so what I said to Andrew is, you know, ultimately we settle on editing. You know, what's the superpower that the cinema has? Well, it has editing. Shot A plus shot B equals thought C. So if you're trying to show, you know, particle wave duality, let's have shots favor the particle nature, shots that favor the wave energy nature, cut them together, Jen Lane, my editor, cutting them together in different combinations to see how that makes us feel about what we're seeing. To try and get across this idea of this a complete paradigm shift, a new way of visualizing the world, a new way of feeling about the world that I think the audience, like Oppenheimer, wants to find a little unsettling and maybe threatening at the beginning, and then come to realize how powerful it is.
We're going to have to wrap soon, but I just want to talk about Trinity, because I don't know about you guys, but I don't think I breathed through that entire sequence at all. You know, it's heart-stopping, and I'm wondering at what point you decided you wanted there to be the absence of sound, or just the men breathing, because it's so affecting, and I don't know, it's just one of those moments that really always stay with me after I see it.
I really started to wrestle with it at script stage, because as I started to write the sequence and put it together, it's something we dealt with in Dunkirk, for example, about the relative distance, speed of sound and all that. And of course, as I was writing the Trinity sequence, everything was about a meticulous reconstruction of reality. So then you get to the moment of ignition and you sort of think, okay, do we betray that at this point? I mean, not unlike with Interstellar, where we're suddenly in space, it's like, okay, are we going to have the sound of Dr. Mann getting sucked out of the airlock, or are we going to just cut the soundtrack, you know, as you would, as real life would suggest? And in the case of Trinity, it felt, once I wrote it that way, I started to really embrace it. It just put a huge amount onto, well, the performances of everybody, what they're watching, and the visual effects. Because that's a visual effects sequence that lingers for, 25, 30 seconds, and there's no sound to help it. There's nothing to back it up except, the sound of people breathing. But to me, leaning into that intensity, I don't know, it felt different, it felt special to me.
I'm sure that was something that was on your mind before shooting, but I'm also just curious, was there anything else that was keeping you up at night? Any scene or something that surprised you on the day that turned out to be a lot more challenging than you were expecting?
Did you sleep at all during this movie?
56 days.
I found it all terrifying and challenging, but exciting. I mean, you're trying to challenge yourself as a filmmaker. I felt very excited to work with the people I was working with, truthfully. I really did. And so I felt incredibly well supported. The advantage of being a writer-director is as William Goldman says, you get to make it once first yourself. And I got to do that. So I got to sort of see a version of it, that was possible. But then, as everybody else starts to bring their brains, their ideas, their creativity to the table, every day you're seeing something beyond what you imagined it to be. So that's very calming, actually. I mean, really calming. I mean, when I was thinking about how I was going to shoot the build-up to Trinity with the device itself, and I had specified that we only need to build the bits of the gadget that would be seen as per the script, my department heads, respectfully demurred and actually just built the thing in great detail, because they knew from their experience of working on a lot of films that we were going to need more than that. And of course, once I then got set and saw that they figured out how to shrink wrap the bomb, go through all the different stages that were gone through in reality, then we just, it's like, so go look at this, we'll put a camera on it, we're just going to see every single stage. And so every day I'm in the scene with Groves and Oppenheimer watching it hoist, and Ruth came to me not long before we shot the scene and said, they put mattresses underneath it in case it fell. And I just thought, well, we have to put that in the film. It's incredible detail. I mean, I don't know the physics of whether a mattress would help if it dropped on top bomb by mistake. But the fact that it was so, they were making this up as they went along. It's this kind of high-tech, low-tech thing meeting in the desert that's so kind of incredible. And I always, when I see the back of General Gross in that shot, I feel like I know what he's thinking when they roll the mattresses in.
He's thinking, would a mattress actually make a difference?
Yeah, is sunscreen going to really help with this? Matt, I will leave you with the last word because...
Why?
Well, because they're going to be too
Please.
modest. I would like
Please.
you to speak a little bit about the experience of what it's like to be on a set with Emily and Chris.
Oh my God. All right. Well, look, like I said, it's my happy place. It's the absolute best place you can arrive as an actor or a craftsperson in this business. And if you look at the results that they've had, the movies that they make, what's really rare about it, their movies are great, but what's really rare are great performances in big movies. It's really hard to get great performances in small movies. That's a really hard thing to do, and I've spent my life trying to do that. But every time you add any element to a shot, it gets exponentially more complex and more difficult to actually capture the scale that you're looking for and act in believable, great performances. And the best thing I ever heard about directing was from Soderbergh, actually, who explained it as it's like trying to make a mosaic that's a block and a half long from 2 inches away. And that's a perfect description of what it is to try to take on something like this. And so to consistently have these great performances, they've come up with a system, they just know a lot about a lot, I think is the best way to say it. Because I could talk for hours about what it takes to marshal all of those forces and to talk to actors, and we can be difficult. And honestly, the smallest thing, I remember Clint Eastwood on a set once, a young PA yelled to somebody, and Clint and I was there, so I overheard this. He quietly walked over and put his hand on the young guy's arm, and he said, don't yell. He goes, it doesn't take a lot to get people nervous. And it was just 60 years of filmmaking where he just knew. Because I've been on those sets, and I'm sure he'd been on a bunch of them, where it doesn't take a lot to tip over the energy of the people. And so it's all about understanding how to get everybody rowing in the right direction. And that is really, really hard to do. And the bigger the movie, the harder it is. And they do it better than anybody. So.
Thank you.